Thank you, Dr. Kubik. I appreciate the library for doing this, and I'd like for it to be real casual, not like a seminary lecture, and you get enough of those. So the library folks suggested that I talk about the background book, maybe 20 minutes. If I say something that arouses your interest, just blurt it out. Pretending like we're at home and just having coffee together, so it could be real conversation. But I want to kind of give you some of the background of the book. Dr. Grace, Dr. Massey, and I were three editors. It's kind of a group project. Each chapter has a different editor. Dr. Massey, Dr. Grace, and I each chapter, but we asked other people to do chapters as well. And we decided that we wanted this to be an academic work, which meant it would not be what we call hagiography. Maybe that word. Hagiography is when it's just all positive, nothing negative. It's just kind of praising the person. And there's room for that. I mean, that can be a good thing. There's a lot of good exhibit. It's like hagiography. It's all positive about a lot of things. But in the book, we decided we're going to tell the truth, have a really balanced approach, and look at the key events in these different eras. It's interesting that 2 years ago we had two people, publishers, come to speak to faculty, and they both said they don't like books like this. Fortunately, neither one was from Pregal, who published the book. But they said the problem with books like this, when you have a different person writing each chapter, is that often there's not a smooth flow from one to the other. You have style differences, repetition. So that can be a problem. But I think one reason this flows smoothly is that each chapter is talking about a different era of time. So my particular chapter is about the era from 1893 to 1914. Dr. Willingham was the head of the Warren Shore, now the IMD, at that time. So, just to give you an idea, Dr. Massey was the lead editor, and he started seriously thinking about this project in 2016. So, it's been about a 6-year journey. A book like this is very complicated. It involves a lot of different things. Sometimes it's hard to find the right authors for each chapter and so forth. So in 2017, he contacted Pregal, which is one of the main Christian publishers besides Zondervan and Larson, things like that. And he was able to get a contract based on his idea. He said that there had not been a history written of the connection shore, which used to be known as Warren Shore, since Dr. Estep, William Estep, wrote one in 1994. Dr. Estep was a history professor here at Southwestern, who died in the year 2000. But his book was published in 1994, and it was just all of his work. So we thought it would be a good idea to have different perspectives. So we talked to history professors, missiology professors, theologians. We wanted to get various perspectives. If it had all been missiologists, we would all be talking about missiological issues, which are interesting to me because I'm a missions professor. But sometimes it's good bringing these other areas as well, because the historical context has affected the IMB. And you think about recently the fears of terrorism, financial crises, that affects the IMB to a great extent. So we gathered a group, we kind of shared our own ideas about people who write various chapters. And again, Dr. Massey took the lead on inviting people to author a chapter. And so our first deadline was June 30th of 2019. We said, please have your chapter in by June 30th, 2019. Well, some of them got it in on time, but others did not. And in the meantime, two of our chapter authors have dropped out for good reasons. They had some good reasons for dropping out of the chapter. Because it is a big undertaking. We asked each author to do between 8 and 10,000 words for a chapter. And the book ended up being about 400 pages long. So it is a big undertaking. On my part, I went to Richmond, and some of you may have been to the IMD building in Richmond, but the archives building is separate from the headquarters building, and it's a block or two away, and it's a nondescript. There, I think I've made appointments, and I worked there all day looking at microfilm of Dr. Willingham's correspondence. And back in those days, 1893, 1914, there was no internet, no email. Just most communication was through what we call today snail mail. And his title was not President of Foreign Missionary, it was Corresponding Secretary. So in those days, that was an appropriate name because he got checks in the mail, he would write to people, so he spent a large amount of his time corresponding to people through what we call now snail mail. There was no cooperative program. That came about in 1925. Dr. Dockery wrote about that in his chapter. And there was no Baptist Faith and Message. The first one came out in 1925. So he just didn't have as many guidelines and channels available for giving and for doctrinal guidelines and so forth. So it was really a complicated situation for him. And I wrote about Lottie Moon. She died during that period of time. And the guy that wrote the chapter before mine, Elliott Coffee Talks, wrote about Tucker, who was the president, the corresponding secretary before Willingham. And he also wrote about Lottie Moon because she came to the field at that time. So two of us wrote about Lottie Moon. And normally she's portrayed as the perfect person who's without sin. But she was like the rest of us. She was flawed. And I pointed out some things, mostly about condescension toward black people. And so she overcame that. She also first was kind of looking down on the Chinese, but eventually she wore Chinese clothing. She appreciated her culture, and she was a great missionary. She overcame her flaws. That's what we all need to do. But I didn't want to portray her as a perfect person who never committed sin. She was flawed, and her father had 50 slaves in the South plantation before the Civil War. So she, of course, was very interesting to us because our Christmas offering is called the Christmas offering. So typically in a chapter, we talk about the historical context. So I talk about the Jim Crow era following the Civil War, Plessy versus Ferguson, Supreme Court decision that solidified the separate but equal doctrine, and how there was a lot of racism in the Southern Expedition. At that time, that affected missions. We didn't have any missionaries going to Africa because racism is a rampant disease in Africa. But that was part of the story in that context. We gave a biography of the leader in each chapter, usually problems with funding, structural issues, typically different strategies that we used. So, for instance, in the period I was talking about, missionaries would go to China, and a lot of them would pay Chinese people to do evangelistic work. And Lottie Moon was against that, because she thought that encourages people to become Christians who may not really be Christians because they want money, so-called vice Christians. So Lottie Moon was against that, and that was just one of the issues that came up in that chapter. We talked about different regions, and eventually different countries were added. China was the original country. We've always had a big investment in China from the very beginning. Africa came later, pretty soon after that. And talked about controversy, challenges, highlights. But it was a difficult project, but I think it helped that each of us were editors, Grace, Dr. Manson, we all had different strengths. So Dr. Massey knew how to contact people. He got a lot of people to endorse it. Almost all the seminary presidents endorsed it. Ben Mandrell from Lifeway endorsed it. Other key people endorsed the book. He was able to contact people and get them to be chapter authors. And Dr. Chipwood, the current president, wrote the foreword. Greenway wrote the afterword. So Dr. Massey really utilized his network of contacts to be very influential, very motivational. Dr. Grace was a really good historian. He understood the discipline, history, and he understood how to format it according to previous standards. My strength was proofreading, and I got to be honest with you, I've read through these chapters many times, and we finally sent in the finished products in November of 2020. Then Kriegel and their people look at it. They had questions for each author, so then I sent those questions to each chapter author, got answers, sent it back to Kriegel. So the book, they added their corrections and sent them back to us in March of 2021. We call them galleys. I'm not sure where that comes from. And it was it looked different on their galleys, so I proofread them again, and I still found more mistakes. And my mother was an English teacher, so I usually catch at least 90% of mistakes that are made. Even things like split infinitives. You know what that is? You have TO2 and a verb, and you're not supposed to split them. So when Star Trek says to boldly go, that's a split infinitive. I put 2 in the search engine and went through everything. I think I had at least 100 split infinitives. Just little things like that. And so finally, the book was released in July of last year in final form. And I'll be honest with you, I didn't read it after it was released because I didn't want to find any more mistakes. I feel guilty about it. But I did look through it last night, and I was telling my wife I found one little minor mistake. I wanted to refresh my memory. And that bothers me. I guess I'm a perfectionist. It's really difficult to catch every single mistake. Sometimes people don't even regard it as mistakes. They're perfections. Don't look at the question about it. So we had a shared file between the 3 editors, and we bounced ideas back and forth. I would ask questions like, do you think we need to change this? And they would bounce ideas back to me. And Kriegel had sent us a publication style manual, so we had to adopt that. And so eventually, we were hoping that this book would be available last summer at the June annual meeting of Sunbeck's convention. It was not. Kriegel did have a table there at the 21 leaders, just like that within the annual meeting. And they had 10 copies. But I was hoping that Lifeboat would have it for sale. Because there were so many people there that I thought would be interested in the book. But that was not to be. I don't know whose fault it was. Maybe Kriegel had not had time to make a lot of copies. But they just gave what 10 at one meeting. But there's a rule that at the annual meeting, the only group that can sell books is Lifeboat. So I was hoping Lifeboat would sell it for us. the president of Lifeway endorsed it, and it is available on the Lifeway website. But that didn't happen, so maybe it'll be available in Anaheim this coming summer. But I think a lot of Southern Baptists don't know about it, and I think they would be interested in it. Southern Baptists really care a lot about the International Mission Board. Lottie Moon Giving is up this year. It's like a Christmas offering for IEP. And I think most Southern Baptists are very interested. They don't know a lot about the history, so I think this book will be very important. And the people that have reviewed it have given it 5 stars on Amazon. And they say it's very readable with all their footnotes. So it is an academic work. And you just have to, usually you have a target audience for a book. So this is meant to be a scholarly work that would be pleasing to academics as well as people that are not academics. The other book that is for sale here, I did in 2017, and I tried to make it both. I have little human interest stories at the beginning of each chapter, and I had endnotes at the end of each chapter for more scholarly people. So I tried to make it interesting for both non-scholarly and non-seminary students who just wanted to learn how to go to church and wanted to get involved. But I also wanted to make it viable for seminary students. So you have to know which audience you're shooting for. And we felt like we were trying to talk to Free Will Publishing, and they did give us a contract. We felt like this book would be used for many years as a textbook in seminaries and universities. So that gives you sort of an idea. I've got to be honest, you don't make much money with books like this. I got a check for $250. That's for them. So I think it's hard for the publishers to make a lot of money. People now read a lot of blogs online, and ebooks, but a lot of people